Good morning. Good to have you with us on this Monday. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers.
From the Middle East to Washington, we have full team coverage of this developing story once again this morning. NBC News foreign correspondent Josh Letterman joins us now from northern Israel. Josh, good morning to you. So there are reports that Gaza's border with Egypt, the Rafah crossing, would open earlier this morning to let foreigners out and let aid in. That's been denied by the Israelis. What's the situation right now?
Well, the situation, Joe, is that thousands of Gazans, including foreigners, have amassed at the border crossing with Egypt trying to get out after this piece of news that seemed like a good development last night when we heard from the Palestinian representative there that they believe there was a deal in place in which there would be humanitarian aid allowed to flow into the Gaza Strip in exchange for Palestinian foreign nationals being allowed out. But then this morning, both Hamas and Israel said there was no agreement in place for the Israeli military to have a ceasefire over that area to make sure that the civilians trying to leave wouldn't come under airstrikes. And so as of now, there doesn't appear to be any civilians actually getting out, which is the latest piece of devastating news for all of those people who are in the Gaza Strip desperately trying to reach safety back in Egypt.
Yeah, I want to ask you a little bit more about that, Josh, just these harrowing images that we're seeing coming out of Gaza, warnings from UN agencies about the situation inside the Gaza Strip. I mean, they are just so incredibly dire. Tell us the latest there, aside just from the people trying to get out at that crossing.
Well, the medical system in the Gaza Strip, Savannah, is at this point really at a breaking point. You have over 1 million Gazans who have now been displaced from their homes, and tens of thousands of them are actually sheltering in hospitals because they're believed to be one of the only places that likely won't be targeted by airstrikes. And I want you to hear from the head of UNRWA, the UN's agency for humanitarian help in the Gaza Strip, about what's going on right now. Watch.
Gaza is being strangled. And it seems that the world right now has lost its humanity. If we look at the issue of water, we all know water is life, and Gaza is running out of water, and Gaza is running out of life. Every story coming out of Gaza is about survival, despair, and loss. Thousands of people have been killed, including children and women. No place is safe in Gaza.
Now, there were reports that Israel had agreed to restore the water supply to the Gaza Strip. But as of this morning, the head of the Gazan Water Authority is saying that is not true. So far, they have not been notified of that.
So, Josh, I want to ask you about where you are right now in northern Israel. We understand there's an ongoing operation to try and evacuate Americans from Israel.
Yeah, that's right, Joe. So if you look up behind me, this is a Royal Norwegian cruise ship, Rhapsody of the Seas, and it is expected to leave in just a few hours, carrying up to 2,500 Americans who are trying to get out of Israel. This is organized by the U.S. government, and it is going to be taking them to Cyprus, where they will then be on their own to try to book hotels or flights back to the United States. This is part of what the U.S. is doing, along with charter flights, to create options for Americans who are in Israel and don't feel safe to get back to the United States, given the fact that Delta, American, United, and other airlines have all stopped flying to and from Israel right now, Joe.
And Josh, before we let you go, do we have any new information on the hostage situation?
The only thing we know is not great, which is that Israel this morning increased its estimate for how many hostages are in Israel, in Gaza Strip, I should say, saying that they have now notified families that there are 199 people they believe are hostage in the Gaza Strip, which is a significant increase from the earlier estimates. We know diplomatic negotiations are ongoing to try to create some type of a hostage prisoner swap between Israel and Hamas, but so far no signs of progress on that front, Savannah.
All right, Josh Letterman reporting from Israel. Josh, thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, NBC News military analyst Colonel Jack Jacobs joins us now for a closer look at Israel's military strategy and what we might see in the coming days. Always great to have you with us, Colonel. Thanks for being here. So the IDF says it's ramping up for this next phase in its military response to Hamas's attack. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to demolish Hamas in Gaza as he spoke to Israel's expanded emergency cabinet just today. With all the bombing that's already happened and what that means it actually physically looks like and what the ground is like in Gaza, what can we expect from this next phase from Israel?
Well, it's extremely difficult to fight in urban terrain, as we already know, and there's so much rubble on the streets, it makes it more difficult for an advancing force to find the enemy and to destroy the enemy. This is extremely difficult terrain. But you use the term phase, and it's really, really important, especially here. Any military operation is going to be phased. And so the IDF has almost undoubtedly drawn phase lines with objectives along those lines so that they can determine how well they're doing along the entire front. And this will take a long time to achieve, especially the initial phases, to make sure that the area is cleared of Hamas and that any non-combatants are evacuated. Second, the IDF had to have must establish collection areas to the rear in Gaza so that any non-combatants can be brought there and taken care of, given food, shelter, water, and medical attention before they move on to the next phase. This all means that it's going to be a very slow and painstaking operation, which is why the IDF says it's going to take some time.
Colonel, on CBS's 60 Minutes, an interview that aired last night, President Biden was asked whether he would support Israeli occupation of Gaza. Let's listen to what he said.
I think that it would be a mistake for Israel to occupy Gaza again. But to going in and taking out the extremists, the Hezbollah is up north, but Hamas down south is a necessary requirement.
So Israel's ambassador to the UN says Israel has no interest in occupying Gaza. So, Colonel, what's Israel's end game here? What course of action should Israel consider taking long term to make sure Hamas is no longer a threat?
Well, I think everybody's right. Israel does not want to occupy Gaza, and certainly not for any length of time. It tried it before, it didn't like it very much, and left. What's really important here is to engage Arab countries in the region to take responsibility for, perhaps in a coalition, to take care of the Gazans. That hasn't happened before, and that's one of the reasons why the plight of the Gazans is so dire, has been dire for a long time, why it's been very poorly administered by the people the Gazans have elected, and why this problem exists now. That problem won't be fixed unless Egypt in particular, but other Arab nations in the region, take responsibility for putting a coalition together to take care of the Gazans. Once that happens, then organizations like Hamas won't be able to return because the people of Gaza will have a much better life. But Hamas has to be gotten rid of, but then the people in the region have to get together to take care of that strip and the people in it.
And how much does that complicate things, Colonel, the fact that there are these civilians as well as hostages on the ground in such a small area where this attack is going on?
It makes it extremely difficult. It's at the best of times, it's difficult to separate non-combatants from combatants, especially in a place where the area is built up, like in Gaza, where Hamas has a history of using human shields. Distinguishing between combatants and non-combatants becomes extremely difficult, especially in the heat of battle. And we've said this before, but it's worth remembering. We should be realistic about the plight of the hostages. Many of them are probably already dead. Hamas has a history of killing hostages, in addition to killing its own people. It's going to be very difficult to distinguish between combatants and non-combatants, and to find hostages and safely evacuate them from a combat area.
All right, Colonel Jack Jacobs, as always, we appreciate you. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Well, former special envoy to the Middle East, Ambassador Dennis Ross, joins us now with more on what we can expect from Israel's ongoing military response and what's at stake for the broader region, really. Ambassador, thank you for joining us. So Israel's military, as we were just discussing, says it's preparing to enter this new phase with what they're calling an integrated and coordinated attack from air, sea, and land. What do you think this will look like for Israel's strategy in the short term, but as well as in the long term, as they plan out what's next?
Look, I think you just heard from Colonel Jacobs how complicated this is going to be, how difficult it's going to be. I think the essence of what the Israelis are trying to do in the near term is soften up the battle space, meaning what they're doing right now with air power is designed to weaken Hamas's military capability in advance of going in on the ground. They have no illusions of how difficult it will still be because Hamas is basically underground. They're in tunnels that they have developed and built all throughout Gaza. They base themselves, a lot of their command positions are under hospitals or under mosques. The tunnels themselves are almost all booby-trapped. Many of the tunnels for sure will have hostages that they may booby-trap themselves or they may certainly use as human shields. So what Israel is doing right now is trying to destroy as much of the Hamas military infrastructure as it can. It's trying to gather intelligence not only about where the hostages are, but also where the key Hamas leaders are. They want to decapitate Hamas. It's not just destroying the Hamas military infrastructure, but they basically want to decapitate the leadership so that Hamas has no command, no control, and that loses increasingly its ability to have any control at all within Gaza itself. That's the near-term strategy that we're looking at, and we're going to see this play itself out, I think, over the coming weeks. I say that deliberately, consciously, because the idea that Israel is going to come in tomorrow on the ground shouldn't have any illusions. Israel right now is trying to keep Hamas, in a sense, uncertain of exactly where it's going to hit and when it's going to hit. And in the meantime, make it increasingly difficult for Hamas to operate at all. At some point, they will come in on the ground. Don't assume it's going to look like just an overall onslaught all at once. I'm not sure that's going to be the shape at all.
Ambassador, there is a growing sense of frustration among Israeli military officials and others. Not enough is being done to rescue the hostages that were taken by Hamas over a week ago. Why? Just spell out what are some of the challenges that Israel faces as it tries to rescue these hostages.
Well, think about in a sense, the contradiction, and it really is. It's a tension in objectives. On the one hand, what you want to do is you want to go and you want to destroy the Hamas capability to ever threaten Israel again. On the other hand, you have hostages you're trying to save and to find and to recover. There's a tension in those two objectives because Hamas is trying to use the hostages first to try to deter the nature of what Israel will do on the grounds that if you come in, we'll execute them. By the same token, Israel has very little interest in actually bargaining with Hamas over the release of hostages, because if they give Palestinian prisoners in return, it would look like Hamas has gained something. And Hamas gaining something is the last thing that is required, especially from an Israeli standpoint, because that ideology of rejection is one they want to show has been defeated, not that it's been rewarded. So how you sort this out is incredibly difficult. It's one of the reasons some of what we may see in terms of the military objectives is first focusing on where they might try to recover some of the hostages. Hostage rescue missions themselves are also incredibly difficult. Oftentimes when you go in to rescue hostages, especially if the Hamas will put them in front, they'll use them as human shields. So you may be able to rescue some, but it's very difficult to pull those off and be able to rescue all of them, because the first thing that will happen is that either they'll be shields or Hamas will kill them as soon as the Israeli military enters. So this is really, it's a situation, to use the word awful understates it. This is a case where that we have a kind of poverty of language to capture the nature of what the hostages are going through, what their families are going through, the nature of what the military challenges Israel will face. And yet it's not going to go away because they're not going to allow this to end with Hamas somehow still being in control.
Ambassador, we just have a few moments, but is a ceasefire agreement at all possible, you think, as we've seen in the past when conflicts between Israel and Hamas have played out?
You're not going to see a replay of what we've seen in 2009, 2012, 2014, 2018, 2021. We have a ceasefire and then used to repeat this all over again. Hamas uses the time to rebuild. You may have some short-term periods to allow the movement of people within Gaza to either evacuate to more safe areas or in the case of getting the Egyptians to open Rafah for certain periods of time so people can actually get out and move to some safe areas there, potentially as well.
Ambassador Dennis Ross, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Sure.
The unfolding conflict between Israel and Hamas is the latest in a region with a long history of tension. NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley takes a look back at the history of Israel.
This sliver of land along the Mediterranean Sea has been fought over for centuries. Several different faiths call it home. Once colonized by the Ottoman Empire, the region, known then as Palestine, came under British control after World War I. The British government sought to partition the land for Jews persecuted in Europe who saw it as their ancestral homeland. A mass migration followed, increasing tensions and violence in the region. Following the horrors of World War II, Jewish migration swelled, as did Western support for the creation of a Jewish nation.
World jury that will not put up with gas chambers anymore.
And in 1947, the United Nations voted to approve two separate Jewish and Arab states with Jerusalem as an international city. But the plan was opposed by the Palestinian population and the rest of the Arab world. With the problem still unresolved and violence mounting, Britain withdrew, and the Jewish population declared their own independent state.
Israel had taken its place among the nations of the world.
The United Nations accepted Israel, but 5 neighboring Arab countries invaded. Thousands of Jews and Arabs were killed, and an estimated 750,000 Arabs either fled or were expelled in what the Palestinians call the Nakba, or the catastrophe. Generations later, they remain refugees, even as Israel welcomes Jews from all over the world.
For more than 20 years, the Palestine refugees have lived in camps like this, more than 1 million of them, jammed together.
In 1967, war broke out once again.
In the face of Egyptian threats, Israel launched a preemptive strike. In 6 days, that changed the Middle East.
Known as the Six-Day War, Israel gained land in Gaza, Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, Syria, the West Bank, and the sacred city of Jerusalem. But a few years later, Arab armies invaded once again on the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur, making initial gains that humbled Israel.
They came in low, their cannons blazing. The troops here fired back with machine guns and small arms.
The Arabs' sudden display of strength laid the groundwork for reconciliation.
We are not seeking to throw you into the sea, but we are seeking not to be thrown into the desert ourselves.
Egypt and Jordan made peace deals with Israel. Then a huge breakthrough in 1993. The Palestinian ruling body agreed to recognize Israel for the first time. Suddenly, peace seemed within reach. The Oslo Accords called for the eventual creation of a Palestinian state, a two-state solution. But the deal has struggled to hold, fueled by anger over Israeli settlements and Palestinian attacks. In the coming years, more radical religious movements emerged among the Palestinians. Palestinians elected Hamas in 2006. The group seized control of Gaza a year later.
The Hamas charter calls for the destruction of Israel. The Israelis say they're terrorists.
Fearing attacks, Israel and Egypt imposed a blockade, a move condemned by human rights groups as an open-air prison. Meanwhile, Hamas fighters continued to attack Israel, who in turn pummeled the region with missiles and rockets in a seemingly endless cycle of violence. Then Hamas opened a new and bloody chapter in this ancient story, carrying centuries of history into a new and terrifying present.
Our thanks to Matt Bradley for that report.
Well, demonstrators across the country flooded the streets this past weekend, showing support for both Israelis and Palestinians. But the two sides were often seen clashing, putting national security on high alert. NBC News correspondent Jesse Kirsch has the details.
American authorities are on alert.
There's no question we're seeing an increase in reported threats, and we've got to be on the lookout, especially for lone actors.
The FBI warning comes as people continue demonstrating in solidarity with Israelis and Palestinians worldwide. Groups demonstrating on both sides in Austin, Texas. NBC's Priscilla Thompson was there.
Hundreds gathered at the Texas state capitol rallying in support of Israel. And right afterward, an even larger crowd gathered for a pro-Palestinian rally, just two of many happening across the country.
Over the past week, we've heard calls for peace, but we've also heard chants like this. Outside Australia's famed Sydney Opera House, in a pro-Palestinian crowd, some called for genocidal tactics the Nazis used as they murdered 6 million Jews. In California, someone waved a Nazi swastika flag. Hamas's terrorism marked the deadliest attack on Jews since the Holocaust. And in the week since, the Anti-Defamation League says preliminarily reports of anti-Semitic incidents in the U.S. have spiked almost 300% year over year.
We know that Jewish individuals and institutions regularly are targeted and victimized by people who collectively blame the Jews.
Among the ADL's concerns, some demonstrators denouncing Zionism, defined by the ADL as the movement for the self-determination and statehood for the Jewish people in their ancestral homeland.
Anti-Zionism is actually a prelude to genocide. It's conditioning people to see Jews as objects, to see Jews as subhuman.
We are in support of our Jewish brothers and sisters, but we cannot accept a state like the State of Israel that imposes a religious and ethnic apartheid.
A debate and a war that have no end in sight. Jesse Kirsch, NBC News.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.